Hi there, welcome back to another episode of Writers Talk, a series in which I talk to writers about, well, writing. Today, got a fairly special guest. It's an author that you may have heard of called John Peel. Now, John and I, we've worked together for the past 7 years, but it's the first time we've actually communicated face to face. So it's quite the moment, really. So, John, if you want to just do a wee introduction by yourself, you go ahead.
Um, what can I say? I mean, yes, 7 years we've been working on the Brig books, really, and it's
Yep.
been huge fun. I remember when you actually asked me to, originally, would I like to write a Brigadier book? And my initial reaction was, oh, I've never written him. And as a writer,
Right up there.
yeah, right, the grandfather infestation.
That's
And I'd never written him in all my other Doctor Who books, so he's such an iconic character. Um, it was one of those offers that you can't refuse, kind of things.
and you've been with us ever since.
It's been so much fun. I mean, as long as it's entertaining me, I'm not going to stop. That's for certain.
I'm the
I
same.
mean,
It's like as long as I'm enjoying it, like Tegan said,
yeah,
right? When it stops
yeah,
being fun, time to go.
right, exactly. And as long as you are having fun, I think it's important for the writers to enjoy what they're doing,
Hmm.
because that's the only way you're going to get through to the reader with that sense of enjoyment. And I think that's very important for, at least for what I write.
Yeah,
I'm not into horrible angst and things. I'm into, let's have a darn good story and adventure time kind of thing.
indeed, indeed.
So
Okay, look, let's go back. Let's go back. When did you begin actually writing professionally? Because I know you've done quite a bit. I was looking on Wikipedia and there's stuff that I've never heard of. You've done
mhm.
so much. I mean, I've got a few good books you can see. There's a few
Yes, I
scattered
see a
behind
few
me.
covers I recognize.
Examples that just happened to be sitting on my shelf like that. I don't know how that happened. So yes, where
Yes.
did this all begin, man? How far back does this go?
Oh, I can remember when I was originally watching Doctor Who as a 9-year-old. Um, I had a friend, Steve Evans, and I used to go and visit him on the weekends, and we often watched Doctor Who together. And then we'd actually sit down and write fan fiction stories back before they were called fan fiction stories. And I mean, I'm talking mid '60s here, so I was writing Doctor Who fan fiction before it was even a thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Because really, I just enjoyed the show so much, I didn't want it to stop,
Hmm.
and have to wait a whole week to get any more. So I'd make my own stories up, which was kind of um, crazy, I suppose, back then. But it seemed to be the only thing to do.
Hmm.
So I've been writing Doctor Who fiction, if you like, for almost 60 years, which is astonishing.
Wow.
Um, but professionally, of course, not until the late 70s, um, when I managed to convince the editor of Doctor Who Weekly that I could write backup strips for the then Doctor Who Weekly.
Okay.
And I had no idea what I was doing, of course, but you don't tell editors that you have no idea what you're doing.
Nope. Just just
Uh,
just pretend you own the place.
right, yes. I remember Terry Nation actually once said to me, if they ask you, can you write this? Always say yes.
And then work it out.
And then he said, then go home, panic, and then do it. That was his advice, and he had said, that was his experience. People would say, "Can you do something?" And he always said, "Oh yes."
Yeah.
And then was like, "Bloody hell, how do I do this?" But it's true. I mean,
Mhm.
I found this to be the case. I think the strangest thing I've ever written was a calendar, and it was after Terry had told me that thing, and I thought, they said to me, "Would you like to do a calendar for us?" And I said, "Oh yeah, sure." um, how do you do it? which is interesting, and uh, that's pretty much how I got into almost every bit of writing I ever did. Was somebody asked me, "Would you like to write something?" And I'd think about it and think that could be fun, right? And then do it.
Well, yeah, I suppose that explains a lot of the stuff I've asked you to do, because I've asked you some abstract things. You know, it's like, oh, can you write? Do you want to write this first? You're like, yeah, sure, okay, cool. A few minutes to figure out how it later. It's like, there's an idea. It's like, oh, it's quick. Because Sean always says to us, right, every time we're like reaching a moment where you're like, we need somebody quickly, blah, blah, blah. Ask John.
Yeah.
Okay. Because you almost guarantee you're like, yes, I can think of something. Not so long later, oh, I've got an idea. Like with the recent thing I asked you to do, which obviously I can't talk about yet because we've not announced it. And you were the first one to come back with, oh, I do have an idea that could work, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
So, yeah. And it's to be reliable.
I've been really lucky because I have the kind of mind that when I start thinking about something, I can usually come up with a plot fairly quickly.
Yeah.
The weirdest example of this, I did a book called The Young Astronauts.
Right.
Because they needed to do it really, really fast. They discovered that they'd done book 1 and book 2, but that there was a big gap between the two stories. So they needed a new book 2 that had to fit in the middle.
Gotcha.
The first one had ended with them blasting off in space, and the second one starts with them in space working on projects. And they realized they needed, it wasn't enough, that they needed more of a transition, but they needed it really fast. And they, a friend of mine, Margaret Bonanno, was working on the series, and they asked her to do it. And she said, no, I can't possibly do it, but ask John Peel because he's really quick. So they called me up and said, can you do this? And I said, yeah, sure. What do you want? And they said, well, it's got to be between books 1 and 2. And it's got to have this and it's got to have that. And I'm going, yeah, okay. And then they said, oh, and we've already got the cover. So you have to have the picture from the cover in the story. Yeah, okay. And then at the end of the conversation, the guy says to me, are you absolutely sure you can do this? Because I'd agreed to everything. And I said, yes, I'm absolutely sure I can do this. So he was a little dubious, but I managed it. It was the worst writing job I ever did in one sense. I mean, I enjoyed it. It was huge. Yeah. But I had to write it in 4 days, a complete novel in 4 days. I mean, I was absolutely shattered at the end of it.
Wow.
And, you know, but I managed it. And actually, I thought, having reread it, it actually turned out very well. I was quite surprised. But it's because I enjoy it. It sounds like fun. I can't, as a writer, you're stuck at home, basically, and there's nobody really looking over your shoulder saying, how you doing? How you doing? Is it coming on? Is it,
Yeah.
Unless you get
occasional email, but that'll be it.
But you've got to be self-motivated as a writer. You've got to get up in the morning and go, oh, I can't wait to get to the next chapter. And that to me is the important thing. Am I going to get up in the morning and really want to work on this, or am I not?
Well, I think that's the I think when you're in that zone where you really loving the work you're working on, that you're literally sleeping and you're like, yes, it's turning around. And as soon as you get up, you're like, get the coffee, quick. Yeah, that's a good place to be.
Well, that's how I work things. I mean, I will make a rough outline of my thing, and then it'll end up with notes scribbled all over it because I've thought of good lines to put into the story and things. I write it down so I don't forget it. So sometimes it's a bit difficult making sense out of what I've done, but it's because I'm enthusiastic. I really do enjoy writing. I mean, at my age, theoretically, I'm supposed to be retired, but
there's no such thing.
I've been writing more than ever.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to stop. It's that simple. I mean, I enjoy being retired.
Well,
vaguely, but not that much.
No. Well, you rise to the challenge. I mean, there's a book, well, 2 books technically, that's going to be coming out relatively soon. We haven't quite got to it yet, but it's certainly in a schedule, which, I approached you about. would you like to do 2 books in one? You're like, okay, what's this about? I told you, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, you just like, yeah, cool. That sounds quite fun, actually. You know, you're literally telling 2 books, but concurrently. And,
Right. Yes.
you know, you just jump to the challenge. And you cannot fault that.
I'd never done that before, so it was a challenge, and a challenge is always.
How did you approach that one? I mean, I'll tell people what it is, just so we're out of the way. It's coming most likely next year, hopefully this year, but you know, there's always things up in the air.
Yeah.
And John's basically going to be doing the next Travers and Wells story, which will be a crossover with the Lucy Wilson mysteries. And just like our Letter Cadets we did a couple of years ago, it's basically going to be 2 books, 1 story told over 2 books that sort of intercut here and there. So how did you actually approach that, John? With great
I just sort of, well, we need points of touch, you know, where they touch. But we don't want, obviously you don't want it to be too much, because then you're just repeating one thing in another book. So there's got to be little crossover points. So I kind of figured out the basic plot, which would cover both books, and then worked out where they would intersect. And then I wrote alternating chapters so that I would keep the storyline pretty much fluid in my mind, because if I'd written one book on its own and then the next, it probably wouldn't have melded very well.
See, yeah, because when that arrived in my inbox, I was like, oh, I could see what you'd done, because you literally sent it the way you wrote it, essentially.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, this should be interesting for me, because usually I don't edit the Lucy stuff. I just do the final read through some on the books and whatnot. Where Sean does that, I would do Travers and Wells. So me and Sean, we're still sort of and ahhing, like, how do we approach it as editors? Does he edit the Lucy stuff and I edit the Travers stuff? But also we need to know both parts of the story, because otherwise we might actually remove something from the Lucy stuff that will completely unravel the Travers stuff. So we've now got the new challenge of, right, how do we edit this without it all going boom?
Yes, exactly.
So now it's our problem.
Yeah, but it is a challenge, and that's part of the fun of it for me.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's like, how do you do 2 books at once that have to intersect but not repeat? And in the end, I think I had to actually just repeat 1 chapter between both books, but then switching points of view, of course. So that it told, I can't remember which way around I did, but from one book, of course, it's told from Lucy's point of view, and then the other one, it's from Travers and Wells. So that was the only the 1 chapter was the only one that actually was repeated in both books. But it's not exactly repeated. It's repeated from different perspectives.
Right. So I suppose a bit like when we did the Letter Cadets with Tim. One was Lucy, one was a Leffer Stewart book, so obviously tonally quite different. In that one, there's a lot of scenes that do repeat, but as you say, from different perspectives. So you get a very different type of scene, even though it's the same scene, which, you know, is quite the challenge. So I can well imagine.
Well, it is a challenge because part of the way I go about writing the books is to find the viewpoint. You know, which character is this going to be told from the viewpoint of? Hello.
This will be the cat that I was telling you about.
Yes.
She's just getting herself repositioned. Hang on 1 second.
Yes.
Oh no, she's coming back.
If our birds were out, they'd be landing on me as well, because they do that.
Pets will do what pets will do.
Pets as pets.
Yeah.
But yeah, as I say, telling the story is which point of view do you take and everything. And once you found that, you know where you're going. But with this double book thing, of course, I had 2 very different perspectives that I had to tell the story from. So I had to keep switching in my mind from Lucy to Travers and Wells. You know, from basically day to day, alternating between the 2, which was interesting.
I suppose the other challenge for you would have also been, especially considering you was writing like chapter by chapter narratively. Like say you're doing Travers and Wells, you could probably take it a little bit darker tonally, where the Lucy stuff, you'd have to line it up because obviously it's still aimed at kids,
Yes.
which must have been quite a switch when you're writing it chapter by chapter, narratively speaking.
Mhm.
That must have been quite the
It was interesting.
mm,
And keeps me on my toes, which is a good thing. And it was, as I say, it was something I hadn't done before, and that automatically makes it interesting. Um, and the challenge kind of keeps me awake while I'm working.
well, that definitely helps.
So I
Now,
can focus on the story. Yes.
you have written a lot of franchise stuff, which I understand that. I've done that too. What would you say, using two different ones that I'm aware of anyway? You've done Star Trek books and you've done Doctor Who books, officially licensed ones, as opposed to the spin-off stuff. How would you compare the experiences? Do they compare?
They're very different. And I discovered that with Time Worm Genesis, in fact. I mean, I really, really, really wanted to do the first original authorized Doctor Who book.
Yeah.
So I pushed really hard for that. But I was actually writing the Star Trek novel you have behind you there at the same time. And
so
that was
pointing backwards.
Yeah, that one.
Oh, you was writing that at the same time as you wrote Genesis.
Right, I was writing the two books almost exactly at the same point in time. And what happened was I had been warned by Peter David, who's a friend of mine. Paramount's very, very picky. They're going to, when you turn your book in, they'll send you 100 pages of notes and everything. And in the end, what happened was I turned my story in, and they sent me basically Starfleet is one word, and that was pretty much their entire comment on the book. They wanted a few changes, of course, but pretty much I think it was like a page I got. And Peter goes, "I hate you," because he showed me some of the story, the notes he'd gotten, and there were pages and pages of really detailed notes. And I didn't get anything like that. But what they do is Paramount is very, very particular about continuity. So they went through it with a tooth comb to make sure that I actually, did everything right.
Yeah.
When I was writing Time Worm, I therefore assumed the same thing would happen, that the BBC would go through it and pick out all the problems.
Oh, no.
And what happened was, of course, BBC got a hold of it and they say, "Oh, well, we don't care. It's dead anyway. Who cares?" And they didn't prove a thing.
Well, yeah, so at that point, TNG was still an ongoing thing, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
What happened was I was expecting a Paramount experience where the BBC would really correct everything if I made a mistake. And the poor old editor Peter Darwell Evans was assuming, oh well, John knows Doctor Who backwards, there's no problem. I don't have to really worry about his getting the details. As a result of which, of course, I made a few serious blunders in Time Worm that, of course,
fans don't let live, do they?
So that was a kind of different experience that I wasn't really expecting at all.
Did that continue then? Because I know you did a fair few. Well, you did 3 Doctor Who novels after that. Before, one more with Virgin.
Yes, that's right. 3 more. Yeah.
Does that experience continue like that, or?
Well, I was on safer ground with the next 3.
Yeah.
What happened was I when I wrote the Sylvester story, I hadn't actually seen all of his shows.
Right.
They were shown over here in such a hodgepodge fashion. So I'd seen about half of them, but not in the right order. So this is why in my mind I got things a little confused. When it came to the Tom Baker, I mean, I knew the Baker era backwards, so that wasn't a problem. By the time we got to or the eighth Doctor.
Yeah.
We really only had the one movie, so there wasn't exactly a lot to remember.
And your book was fairly early in the run anyway. So.
Fairly early, yeah. So I really, I didn't have much invented continuity to follow either, and they didn't. So they just sent me a few notes saying you have to do this, you have to do that. This is the companion, and that's it. Oh, please, can you add a cat?
Of course.
Yeah.
Right. More of the Daleks. As I'm sure anybody watching this, if they've read it, if they haven't, then it's been out for a while, so it's their own fault. It basically not rewrite, but it redefines elements from Remembrance of the Daleks regarding the Skaro, which, as I'm sure you know, has gone down in various ways in the fandom over the years. Because I remember, because I know these days I see it all the time, people saying, oh, that book was badly received at the time, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I remember when that book came out. I remember the contemporary reviews in TV Zone and various places. And I don't remember it being that badly received at all.
No.
I remember people really liking the way that you recontextualized a lot of the 80s Dalek stuff, which my understanding was Terry Nation's proviso anyway, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I don't remember it being that badly received. Time is, well, it's not a nice thing sometimes. Do you still stand by what you did then? Or do you think maybe I should have possibly wrangled it a bit differently? Or
I think possibly I would explain things slightly differently, but basically what happened was I was just so fed up with the Daleks just being tanks.
Yeah.
They were just running around shooting things. They weren't doing anything in the plot. I mean, Davros was the only one that was actually getting anything to do. All the Daleks did was just run around shooting people, which really, I mean, when you go back to something like Power of the Daleks, most of the tension and the threat in Power is from the Daleks.
Yeah.
I know what they're like, but the people on Vulcan didn't. And that created that wonderful tension between the Doctor going manic and the Daleks trying to look like they were being the sensible ones.
Yeah.
And it was because they were Machiavellian. They had plots. They thought. They schemed. And they'd lost this in the TV. It was all like, oh, well, Davros can do all that. And the Daleks are just running around shooting people. I mean, yeah, Daleks do run around shooting people, but that's not all they do.
But they've got planned.
But yes.
Nuhu's done that fairly well most of the time, where the Daleks feel like a threat again, most of the time. I mean,
you can't examine it too closely with it, as with anything. But I really, really miss the idea that the Daleks were these super intelligent and completely amoral characters. So that's what I wanted to get back to with War of the Daleks, more than anything. And that basically involved making them more intelligent again. So I thought, I really never liked the idea of the Seventh Doctor plotting destruction of his enemies. That goes against what Doctor Who is about. Doctor Who is always reactive rather than proactive. He gets into a situation, discovers what it is, figures out a solution, solves it, and moves on. The idea that the Doctor would plot and plan and the destruction of alien species, and in the case of the Daleks, to blow up their entire world, it just struck me as being not really what Doctor Who was about. So I really wanted to take that and say, no, the Doctor was actually outthought. The Daleks were manipulating him all the time, and he never realized it. Because I like that idea that the Daleks could be so Machiavellian. They always tried to outthink the Doctor, but they'd never done it before. Whereas in War of the Daleks, they do win.
Yes.
I mean, at the end of the story, the Emperor Dalek, or the Dalek Prime, uh, has achieved all his goals. He's done exactly what he wanted. He's gotten where he wanted to be. He's ruined Davros's plans. He's beaten the Doctor, basically. And the Doctor is lucky to escape with his life. And I thought this is going to set it up much better for the Daleks in the future. They're going to be far more interesting because they've won. For the first time in their entire Doctor Who history. They win. And I wanted that to be a kind of new high point for them, so that when anybody else came in with writing the Daleks, or well, you know, if I got another chance to do another one after that, you know, they were in an interesting position. And that was what I was really aiming at with War of the Daleks, the idea that the Doctor suddenly realizes that he's not quite as clever as he thought he was, and that the Daleks aren't as stupid as he thought they were. So that was my whole idea behind the book, anyway.
Yeah, I can totally get on board with that. You mentioned Power of the Daleks, which nicely brings me to you have a audiobook just announced.
I'm sorry?
No. You talk about Power of the Daleks, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, but did they not just announce they're doing an audiobook of Power of the Daleks?
Yes, they did.
Yeah. Nicely linked together.
Which quite surprised me because they hadn't actually mentioned it before.
Oh, right. So I was wondering, do they actually approach you first then?
No.
Oh.
What happened was Alistair posted the cover online, and I'm
that's the first.
Wait a minute, what's this? So I contacted the BBC, and they were like, "Oh, sorry, we lost your address. We couldn't talk to you."
Internet, come on. They could have found you via Facebook.
Yeah. So apparently, the last audio was done by Audio Go.
Right.
And that was disbanded. And all of the files and everything went one way, and the personnel went another, and they completely lost track of me. Apparently, I don't know.
Well, I found you 57 years ago, so you know.
Yeah, but this is the BBC. Don't forget.
Well, say no
more.
So,
but yes, I'm absolutely thrilled that they're doing it because I love these audio books. I mean, the one, especially the Chase. I just thought that was done so beautifully, and you know, read so well.
I haven't heard the Chase. I mean, obviously, I've got the book. Clearly, there it is. Obviously, I've heard the Dalek Master Plan. One's there, one's over.
Wonderful.
And I think Peter and Jean Marsh. They said Sarah then.
They did a great job. They really did.
Yes, they did an amazing job. And who's doing the narration for?
Nicholas Briggs is doing the whole thing.
The whole thing. Okay, he's pretty decent. So that's really good.
Yeah, he's good. So I'm happy. And Alistair's cover is really, really nice. He's done a beautiful new painting for it.
Saw that.
Yeah. So these are the things that I really love. I mean, as a writer, seeing what they're doing with my projects.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been nice to have been asked first, but you know what.
But obviously, you weren't going to say no anyway.
I would have said yes anyway. So.
Like no, only joking.
But you know, it's great fun, and it's like, you know, you're seeing how people are interpreting your work, which is always lovely, because sometimes it makes it sound much better than it really is.
And of course, it's nice when it's something you've done, because mid-90s, I think those were done originally.
Yeah, good 30 years back.
Yeah, because it was during the Missing Adventure time, wasn't it?
Right.
And obviously they've been out of print for quite a while then, so this, new life for it. So bonus points.
Exactly. In fact, going back to Terry again, I remember I asked Terry one time what his favorite part of writing was. And he said reprints, all the money, none of the work, which is Terry all over. But it's true. Reprints are a great thing for a writer, of course. There is that aspect of you're actually getting paid for doing nothing.
Yeah.
But the reinterpretation is also good. You know, the way it goes into a different medium.
Well, yeah, I mean, I had that with Forgotten Son and Beast of Fang Rock. Terry Malloy did, and it's like it's interesting to see how somebody else, as you say, interprets it. So yeah,
yes,
absolutely.
It really is. It's so much fun, and I mean the whole audio thing is still fairly new to me. Although I've written a number of audio plays specifically for now, but it's so new to me. It's still thrilling.
Yeah, and to get your books back out there, then obviously that you can't really complain, can you?
No, and I get to listen to my own words and sometimes think, oh, you know, that actually isn't too bad.
Do you get what I got with Forgotten Son, where you listen to it, and indeed Fang Rock, where you're like, did I really write that? That was pretty good, actually.
Yeah, I know, and it's lovely when that happens.
You're like, I'm not that bad after all.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
because I mean, as a writer, you kind of critical of your own work.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
I mean, I go back and read some of my earlier works occasionally, not too often, but occasionally I'll go back and read them. And my initial reaction is almost always, oh, I could have worded that better, or I could have done this a little bit better. But you can't help it. I mean, as a writer, you do that. You're constantly thinking, how can I make this the best possible end result?
Absolutely.
And that's why I like working with editors who understand what I'm doing, because then they're working to say, how can we make this book the best possible book? And, you know, this is why if I work with an editor and I enjoy the work and they, you know, they understand what's going on, I really like to work with them again. I had one editor, Craig Walker, who I would do anything for, because he absolutely got what I love to do. So he would call me up and say, John, would you like to write Jane Eyre with dragons? And that was all he would do. And then, of course, he knew what I was like, because the next day he got a complete outline.
Yeah.
Because he knew what I was like, and he knew what would happen when he asked me a question like that. So, you know, I mean, when you work with people like that, it's so much fun, because you just have no idea what might happen next.
Well, yeah, it's a. I mean, we should need to wrap up shortly, but let me just say, it's a bit like when we had a book that fell through, you know, a couple years ago. Yeah, and we definitely needed to find a new writer, because obviously some had been pre-ordered, so we had to get this book out there, and it was just hell behind the scenes. And we're like, right, John Peel, he can do this. So we went straight to you, and we're like, obviously, blah 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 la la la, you know. And you're like, yeah, okay. And I think you, like you said, I think it literally was the next day. You like, right, this is what I think it should be. And we're like, yeah, cool, let's do it.
Yeah,
just like that.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. I mean, I really enjoy doing the Brigadier stories. So when you say, can you do a story, whatever, immediately my mind starts thinking, and, you know, I usually work, as I say, for some reason, my mind works like that. I come up with, what can we do? How can we do this? And then click, 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 and it fits together. I can't explain how I do it. I just do it.
Just do it.
It just takes that little spark at the beginning.
Yeah.
And if it's something that sounds interesting, that just sets my mind going, and then I can't wait to get to work on it. I mean, literally, I'd probably start writing it immediately if I could.
I know that feeling.
You have to have, as a writer, you have to have that enthusiasm for what you're doing.
I think so. If you're writing something that you're not enjoying, it will show. 100%, it will show.
Yeah.
Right, John, I would love to continue this, and we'll have to do this again, I think, because clearly we've barely scratched the surface here.
Exactly.
Half an hour is limited, but Zoom unfortunately has these time limits, so I don't want to get us cut off. So
Right.
we'll say goodbye to the viewers now. You and I can keep nattering afterwards a bit if you want. So that was John Peel talking about writing, or some of the writing he's done, because obviously, as he said, he's been doing this since he was 9. So, with lots more to cover. So John will definitely be back for another round, I think. Until then, thank you for watching, and thank you, John, for taking part. Until next time, goodbye from me and goodbye from John.